So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to the P&O Azura. Well, actually welcome to the spare bedroom of my house here in Folkestone, but this video is going to be about the P&O Azura. I recently spent 7 nights on her bobbing around the Canary Islands and had a great time. But this was a cheap cruise, very cheap in fact, and I'll share how much it cost later on. During the cruise we learned that P&O had downgraded the experience it offers in a number of areas. And given the low price that we paid, I had to conclude that that wasn't a coincidence. And when you take into account the fact that the Azura is getting on a bit, overall it wasn't a great experience. I'll stress again that I had a great time, but this was probably the worst cruise I've ever been on based on the quality of the product delivered. I'll attempt to explain all of this as we go, but first I want to talk a little bit about the perils of making this sort of video on YouTube. Let's assume you take 16 cruises on P&O. 3 are outstanding, 9 are great, 3 are bad, and 1 of them is terrible. Taking all of them into account, I think most people would be happy to book their 17th cruise on P&O. But if you've only taken 1 cruise and it was the terrible one, you'll never cruise with them again. And if you take 4 cruises, but it's these 4, you'll be completely confused about what P&O is offering, and will probably give your future bookings to someone else to avoid taking the gamble. This was my first cruise with P&O, and it was poor, but I'm resisting the urge to recommend that you avoid P&O because I know that a sample size of 1 is not big enough to draw a conclusion from. So in this video I'll attempt to explain what I mean, and if you'd like to see whether I succeed, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt and I love cruising. I love the ships, the places you visit, the entertainment, and every now and again I'll also enjoy a drink. So subscribe and you might pick up some hacks, hints and tips to make your next cruise better. I'll say again for the 3rd time that I had a great time and bits of the experience were really good, including the process of getting to and from the cruise. We'd booked a package including flights and transfers, and it was really quite a joined up experience. I reviewed our flight down to Tenerife with Jet2 in this video, and picking up the narrative from where that video ends, we were directed to a fleet of buses parked outside the terminal on arrival. Our bags were loaded onto the coach and we next saw them outside our cabins. Jet2 were really good and the experience felt seamless, and as everyone on our flight was heading for the Azura, the holiday spirit had kicked in before we even left the UK. It was about a 45-minute drive up from Tenerife's South Airport to the cruise terminal, and we were one of the last flights to arrive that day, which made for a very quiet and painless check-in experience. Most of the heavy lifting is done online before departure, but we had been asked to bring proof of vaccination and proof of insurance, neither of which was asked for by the check-in team. My mum isn't brilliant on her pins, so we'd requested wheelchair assistance for this last stretch, which was duly provided. It wasn't actually that far to the ship, and she was asked to transfer from a wheelchair operated by the terminal to a wheelchair operated by the ship before she was hauled aboard, but all was good. And onto the ship, and the first bit of the normal cruise experience that was lacking on this P&O cruise. There really wasn't a fanfare on boarding. Usually there's banners, perhaps a band and perhaps even a glass of champagne. On the P&O Azura there was really nothing. Here's what I think was happening. As everyone travelling on the cruise has to fly down from the UK, they spread arrivals across 2 days. Based on the flight arrangements we saw, probably 40% of new passengers had arrived the day before we did, and we were amongst the last of the 60% to arrive on the 2nd day. And because boarding was spread out across those 2 days, P&O seemed to have decided that it was too hard to turn our arrival into much of an event. Or perhaps they decided to save some money by not deploying staff to make it a big deal. Either way, it was really disappointing. The moment you step on your cruise ship is usually something to celebrate. It marks the true beginning of the holiday. But P&O made minimal effort to mark that moment when we boarded the Azura, which was quite a big letdown. We headed straight for the muster station and came upon another difference. We registered our attendance with the crew, but there was no presentation, there was no demonstration, there was basically nothing other than proving that we'd been to the muster station. A safety video was playing in our cabins, but unlike other cruises that we've been on, there was no mechanism for confirming to P&O that we'd actually watched it. Other cruise lines make you confirm that you've watched the safety presentation through an app or even by making a telephone call. But on P&O, there was nothing. Some cruise lines have now reinstated the in-person full muster drill, but on P&O the whole process felt really thin. While I'm talking about the cabin, I made a dedicated cabin tour video which you can find here. It was a dated space and there were some downright weird bits, but overall it was okay. Not great, but okay. One element of the cabin offing that actually wasn't okay concerned our cabin steward. It was announced that we wouldn't be getting an evening visit from him, and it was a him. No turn-down service, no chocolate on the pillow, no refreshment of towels, and no towel animals. There was actually a towel animal display in the terminal, which I thought was quite deceptive, as P&O had decided they were a luxury that wouldn't be offered during the cruise. There was an announcement that our cabin attendants would have other duties in the evenings, although it was never made entirely clear what those other duties actually were. It was by no means the end of the world not to get chocolates or fresh towels at the end of the day, but it was a clear dilution of the product offering that we hadn't expected, and I felt it reflected very badly on P&O that they felt they needed to do this. By all means, pinch some value or some extra labour out of your cabin attendants, but to announce it so forthrightly was really quite a disappointment. We attended the captain's welcome speech on the first formal night. The captain clearly fancied a career in stand-up comedy when his days at sea were over, and he reported that there were 2,700 passengers aboard. Wikipedia says that the ship can hold 3,000 passengers if every room had double occupancy, which is probably a realistic maximum load during term time when relatively few kids were aboard, which meant we were around 90% full. Good for P&O, but perhaps not a surprise, as the cruise was very competitively priced and had even been advertised on TV. He also reported that there were 1,150 crew aboard. Wikipedia suggests the Azura has capacity for 1,226 crew, so we had around 93% staffing. And as the stateroom service levels had been downscaled, you would expect that this strong crew to passenger ratio would have produced an excellent service. It didn't. Much of the service was poor, particularly in the main dining room. Service there varied between slow and glacial, and I felt it was grudging and mechanical. The crew really didn't look like they were enjoying themselves. At breakfast, one guy a couple of tables away asked for some marmalade, as the table hadn't been reset completely after the last guest had left. The server acknowledged this, walked about the 5 paces to a service station where I'd previously noted that they stored the marmalade, and he stood there staring into space for a couple of minutes before picking up a tray and walking off. About 10 minutes later he'd not returned, so I noticed that the guy actually got up, found a staff person and got them to get him some marmalade. It was just poor. That's a particularly bad example, and I could give you plenty of other examples of poor service that were received by us or others. Generally, the service in the bars was good, and there was some energy amongst the staff, particularly in the Planet bar. But even so, there were lowlights, including a first for me on a cruise. A server took our order in the Manhattan bar and then forgot about it and went off shift, with our cards still in his pocket. It was busy, so we didn't think much of it for 10, maybe 12 minutes, but when we realised that we couldn't see our server anymore, I went to the bar to query what was going on. Whereupon we realised that the server had finished his shift and had gone. It took them perhaps 15 minutes to work out who it was, where he'd gone, and to then call him and summon him back to the bar with our cards. He was very apologetic when he returned, and no harm was done, but it's the first time it's ever happened to me on a cruise, and it feels like a good example of how disinterested the crew often were, or perhaps it's a good example of how poorly trained they are. Several people I spoke to who are P&O veterans commented that the service on the Azura was poor compared to their previous experiences, but more frequently they commented on the food. I thought the food in the main dining room was regularly excellent, and occasionally it was exceptional. These poached eggs were perfect. There just wasn't enough of it. Plus there was quite a narrow menu of options to choose from. I'll eat almost anything, so never struggled to find an interesting option on the menu, but others complained that they'd struggled to find things to order. And I heard even more regularly that people had to go to the buffet after dinner as they hadn't been served enough in the main dining room. Normally, if you're not served enough in the MDR, you'd just order more. But P&O has returned to seating the vast majority of people on shared tables. There was often a lengthy wait to be seated at your own table, up to an hour some nights, and on one night that option wasn't offered at all. It's great that dining with people outside of your travel group is back after being banned during the you-know-what, but it did mean that the entire table was served together, which made it really quite awkward to break ranks and order extra dishes if you weren't happy. So the food was good, but I have to attribute the stingy portion sizes to being yet another way in which P&O was trying to save money. As for the buffet, overall it was awful. Once again, the food itself was really quite good, but the design of the buffet was terrible. There were actually two buffet areas mirrored on both sides of the ship, and both were small, cramped, unattractively designed, and clearly could not cope with the 2,700 passengers who might be trying to eat there. There's nothing P&O can do about the buffet without a major reconfiguration of the space, and the food was good. It was just a poor experience. At least you could control your own portion sizes. We kind of fell into the thrift mindset on this cruise, so didn't go to any of the speciality restaurants and didn't really hear any reports from anyone who did. We did have burgers and hot dogs from the snack bar by the pool, which were okay. We were also excited to have the afternoon tea experience in the main dining room, which is advertised on the website as taking place once per cruise. But it wasn't offered on our cruise, again I can only assume as a way of saving money. The buffet offered the elements of an afternoon tea every day, which I think P&O would point to as a defence for not offering it in the main dining room. But my mum was really looking forward to having the formal served experience and was really disappointed that she didn't get it. One last point on food, and again a shortcoming. Between 9:30 and 11 PM, nowhere on the ship is open for food. All restaurants are closed, even the speciality ones, and the buffet takes those 90 minutes to swap over from dinner to late snacks. That's exactly the time window when early diners are coming out of the main theatre and may be peckish after their delicious but scrawny dinner. Your only option is to go back to your cabin and order room service, which simply is not good enough. A quick word on drinks. We bought the drinks package, which was good value, although the drinks range again is somewhat narrow, and the structure of the package means P&O really rations your consumption. I'll make a video about the 6 ways that P&O is different from their cruise competitors, and I'll talk in a lot more detail about this in that video. I mentioned that the captain appeared on a formal night, of which we had 2 on this 7-night cruise. P&O is far more formal than any other line I've been on, so asked for black tie on both of those nights. You could get away with a suit and tie, but I dug out my penguin suit and joined in. It was fun, but doing it twice in 3 nights was a bit of a chore, and you were a little limited on what you could do on the ship on those 2 nights if you didn't want to join in. So on to the entertainment, which I really enjoyed, although again I have reason to be critical. I really did enjoy this cruise. The main theatre offered shows on 6 of the 7 nights of the cruise. The double turnaround days seemed to be the reason why we missed out on a night's main theatre entertainment, although it could be seen as another way for P&O to save a few quid. There were only 2 guest headliners aboard, Richard and Adam, who placed 3rd on Britain's Got Talent in 2013. They weren't exactly my cup of tea, but they were very well received. And Ben Moss, who I preferred and thought was an excellent all-round performer, very funny too. Ben actually offered a second show in the Manhattan venue on that 7th night when the main theatre was closed, which I suppose is some compensation. He was so good and so popular, he probably could have filled the main theatre had he had the chance to. always feel a little shortchanged to only have 2 headliners on a 7-night cruise, however good they are. Potentially another way for P&O to save some money, although I will name check 2 other guest performers who didn't get a main theatre show. Phil Walker was a comedian.
Cruises. Do you know where I went when I was 17 on holiday? Outside!
And Danny Graham was a singer who did a Dolly Parton tribute show, but could also really belt them out in her own right. Both could have filled the main theatre, but were rostered into the smaller venues on our cruise, so perhaps the headliner situation wasn't that bad overall. The other 3 nights in the main theatre were filled with production shows from the ship's cast. And these shows were really ambitious. I cannot accuse P&O of scrimping on the licensing fees they pay for the rights to perform some of these songs. There were songs from lots of current West End musicals, plus just about every James Bond theme ever. Those rights don't come cheap. The vocal talents of the cast weren't always up to the challenge that the song presented, particularly when the responsibility fell to the male singers. Saying that, they were often expected to sing whilst keeping up with the energetic and complicated dance routines. So I am happy to overlook the occasional bum note from them. There was a strict prohibition on filming any of the production shows, which is why you have to put up with my head for this sequence rather than clips from the shows in question. A word also about the house band Pulse. Unlike many of their crewmates, they really did look like they were enjoying themselves, and I enjoyed them too. The average age of passengers was fairly high, so there was also a lot of formal dancing offered, I think every night, which was very popular. Finally, the itinerary. I'll make a separate video reviewing the ports that we visited, but here I'll say it was good. No port in this part of the Atlantic overwhelms you with options for things to see and do, which may put some people off taking a cruise in this part of the world, but if you're looking for relaxing, manageable, pleasant towns to spend a couple of hours in, you'll be just fine in the Canary Islands. We also had 2 sea days, which is 2 more than I would ideally pick, but overall I thought it was a decent itinerary. So wrapping all of this up, I really enjoyed it, even with all of the shortcomings I've highlighted. I really enjoyed being on a cruise after hunkering down for much of the winter. The weather was great, the entertainment was great, the food was great, albeit stingy. And the packaged flights were pretty seamless. On our way back, we tagged our bags in our cabins and didn't see them again until the carousel at Gatwick. But the service was consistently poor, and the ship itself felt really dated, and in some areas, such as the cabins and the buffet, that design really doesn't work. But overall, it felt like P&O had taken every opportunity to save money, to the real detriment of the passenger experience. And that's where this review gets difficult and takes me back to my opening gambit about the perils of drawing conclusions from a sample of 1. YouTubers often have one bad experience and condemn the air or cruise line entirely as a result of it. It would be easy for me to do that with P&O. It wasn't a good experience and I'm just not excited about travelling with them again. But I can't believe that experience represents the true P&O. I think it was an opportunity to try and squeeze some profit out of one of their older ships during the shoulder season when otherwise the ship may have just laid idle. Even if that meant diminishing their offering and deviating from what they actually promise on their website. A few days ago they had a naming ceremony for their newest ship, the Arvia. And I refuse to believe that the experience that you'd have today on that shiny new ship, it would be the same as the experience that we had on the older Azura. It's dangerous for a brand to do this. I'm having flashbacks to my previous business career here. But for me, consistency is crucial to building a successful brand. McDonald's is successful not because the product's any good, but because you know what you're going to get when you visit them. I think P&O is really damaging their brand by offering such a diminished experience. 2,700 people will come away from that cruise disappointed. And many who've sailed with P&O previously can only conclude that P&O just isn't what it used to be. The captain reported that 1,200 passengers were on their first ever cruise with any line at all. And if any of them are watching, let me tell you, cruising gets a lot better than the experience that we all shared in the Canaries. I will cruise with P&O again, but I can't say I'm excited about it, just in case the experience we had on the Azura is actually a true reflection of the P&O offering today. But I won't be rushing to take another cruise on the Azura or any cruise on P&O slightly out of season where the pricing just looks too good to be true. We paid £1,150 each for 7 nights, single occupancy of a balcony cabin with flights, transfers and a drinks package included. Which is exceptional value, and it probably was good value for the experience we received. It's just a shame that our expectations of the P&O brand were so much higher. I did still enjoy it though. So thanks for watching. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment. Have you noticed the P&O brand changing over time? Please consider subscribing if you're new, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there's a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. Also gives you access to our WhatsApp group where we chat about all things flying and cruising every day. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.